A longtime entrepreneur, Nick Kirkes is now the co-founder and CTO of Bountiful, an innovative referral-as-a-service platform. Throughout his impressive career in different companies, Nick has returned to work with Swan Software Solutions. In this interview, he shares about his new venture, entrepreneurship, and why he likes to work with Swan.
Tell me a little bit about Bountiful.
Yeah, so Bountiful is a referral as a service platform. We are solving the need with recruiters, both enterprise and agency, to help manage their referral programs end to end, but also extending their referral reward programs beyond the employee base. So effectively crowdsourcing talent acquisition. So we allow anyone from anywhere to refer talent from their networks into open roles for our customers.
Okay, so can you give me an example of how that would work?
Yeah, so let's say that Swan has an employee referral reward program. If we just start from the simplistic case, particularly for larger companies that have a lot of volume with regards to their referral programs, there's a lot of overhead in managing those programs. So there's the task of marketing that there's a referral reward available. There's trying to get your employees activated to go and participate, which means that they're generally having to think of who do they know that might fit this role, or even if there's a role open that is relevant to their network. And then there's the communication that happens, the payment that happens, all of these things. So this end-to-end process. So the simplest case for our enterprise recruiters is that we effectively take all of that work and automate it. So through connections to the applicant tracking systems and HR systems, to communication directly to and with your employees around the status of their referrals, to making candidate suggestions from within their own network, surfacing high quality candidates to the recruiters so that they know who they're looking at in terms of those referrals. Those are all things that are kind of encompass that workflow automation for the employee referral program. Now, beyond the employee base, then what we also do is, let's say Swan creates a bounty around a particular role that they're hiring for. We will help promote, and you as Swan will help promote that you have this bounty available. And what that does then is it activates our scout community or our referrer community. And these are folks that have access to talent that may or may not fit that role, but they see that the bounty is available, and then they go and start acting as independent recruiters. Think of it like Uber for recruiting, right? You have a network, why not capitalize on that network and see if you can help fit people into good roles? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, yeah.
Great.
So you kind of have a background in entrepreneurship, startups. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, longtime entrepreneur, I guess, is what most everybody else says when they're asked that question. So yeah, I've had my hands in a variety of businesses, but I've always been within software engineering as far as my career path is concerned. So I started engineering or building software and basic websites, if you can even call it software, out of high school. Effectively a self-taught software engineer. So moved into QA. Moved out of QA into development, and just continue down that path. Now, parallel to that, I have started several other businesses, a music venue in Colorado, a CrossFit gym in Indiana, and then of course, working within the startup realm within software. So I've always had my hands in some kind of an entrepreneurial adventure. Yeah, and that's ultimately what led me to Bountiful. So after leaving Zoom, or around the same time as leaving Zoom, I was looking for an opportunity to get back into startup, and having crossed paths with Scott Dorsey from High Alpha and formerly from ExactTarget, there was an opportunity presented for this particular role with Bountiful. At that time, it was a stealth company, right? And what really appealed to me about the job or about the project was a blatant gap within the industry in terms of talent.
So how did your previous experience affect the creation of this company, of Bountiful?
As entrepreneurs and leaders, we try to replicate the success that we've had, but I find that more often than not, what we're doing is we're avoiding the former mistakes that we've made or failures that we've witnessed or been a part of, right? Failure is such a negative term, but I've worked in both enterprise scale organizations, Zoom, Salesforce, et cetera, I've worked at other startups as well. So bringing forward in terms of how it influenced the startup of this company, I pulled forward effectively everything I've learned from building organizations from scratch, but also thinking about what an organization needs to look like and how it would operate at scale or at varying levels of scale. That's really what influenced my particular participation and influence within the business. Now, that said, Bountiful is a high alpha studio company. So kind of going back to basics for a moment. Anybody that's familiar with High Alpha Studio, it's a venture firm that effectively launches new businesses, right? It's not an incubator, but an accelerator, right? So the idea of Bountiful was actually birthed within the High Alpha Studio. My co-founder and CEO, Scott Sinatra, was the first on board to pick up the idea and run with it. I was the second. So Scott brought me in to participate. So to be frank, the idea was not mine, right, to begin with, but Scott and I worked hand in hand to evolve the idea to where we are today.
So what exact problem were you trying to solve?
Early on, it was around the pain of managing referral programs alongside being able to extend referral rewards outside of the four walls of the business, as we like to say. So the really appealing and interesting idea for me as a technologist was this idea of a marketplace for referrals, right? So, if we look at services like Blind and maybe even LinkedIn, things like that, where there are social and professional networks, right? You see a lot of activity like, hey, I'd like to apply to this job. Does anybody have a referral available? Or you have people pitching that they work there and can earn a referral bonus. And so they're looking for people that might want to apply. So, but they're having to do this in kind of an ad hoc, I guess, bootstrapped kind of way, which is painful for all sides of the equation. So, there's a multitude of problems, though, that ultimately that we're trying to get after. So the inefficiency in the existing referral program, extending the referral program beyond the employee base so you can increase the number of referrals that come in the door. We know that referrals generally are stronger candidates. That comes with some caveats. So anybody listening to this, there's some known caveats there. But one of the other issues that we were looking to solve for that has a lot of attention from our customers and investors and advocates, right, is the idea that generally speaking, employee referral programs really just sustain homogeneity within a business, right? So it doesn't help to diversify the business. And that makes sense, right? Ultimately, we're going to refer people that are top of mind. People that are top of mind tend to be people that are our immediate networks. They tend to be like us, think like us, do things like us. So your referrals tend to be very homogenous, right? The idea of breaking that up, though, is really appealing and compelling. And that is in being able to connect open positions to a broader network by extending these referrals out beyond your employee base. You have access to more diverse referral opportunities, but you can also take that and extend it into partnerships, right? Think about like, diversity focused organizations, folks that might be bringing up underrepresented communities in tech, just as an example, right? We can partner and work with those organizations directly, and they can leverage the referral rewards in a nonprofit way, but they can also help their communities by shining light on opportunities within communities that don't normally get that kind of attention, right? That's a big goal, and it's really difficult to measure, but it is one of our early and kind of core value propositions.
Okay. So how did you meet Scott?
Actually through a referral. So,
Okay.
the proof is in the pudding. So, as a test case, High Alpha had put out a referral reward notification. They were going to offer a referral reward for anybody that was interested in this role if they were hired. I saw it and was not interested in the reward, but was interested in the position and the opportunity. So I was able to meet with Scott Sinatra. We had several conversations, of course, and from there, of course, my name was in the hat, and we went through the normal kind of interview process for an executive role. But But yeah, so what was interesting to me was not so much that there was a reward opportunity available, but that caught my attention probably more than just somebody saying, "Hey, we're hiring for." Right? It's a different way of bringing attention to something similar. So, and we've seen that in fact at Bountiful, where we see traction for candidates just because they saw that there was a referral reward available. It does something to how maybe it's got something to do with the algorithm in terms of those professional networks, but those things seem to show up, and we're starting to see a lot of interesting candidate traction that way.
Okay, so how big was the Bountiful team when you guys started? Was it just the two of you, or
Oh
were
yeah,
there more
yeah.
people?
It was one person. Now I say that that's actually not fair. So formally, it was one person in the company. That was Scott Sinatra, and then myself as number two. We grew it to a smaller team, of course, but we were supported as part of the High Alpha Studio family. We were supported for the first half of the year by the High Alpha team. So we had, maybe 10, 12 people, kind of depending on what they were doing for us, everything from product design to go-to-market strategy, finance, et cetera, right? So we had a lot of support. So it's not fair for me to say that there was only one person, but ultimately with Bountiful, it was, Scott and I had to kind of work together to make the decisions that we needed to make to build the business.
Okay. So how did you come to name the company?
I actually wasn't a part of that. It was named Bountiful prior to coming on board. When I came on board, we were just positioning it as a stealth startup. We were keeping it to ourselves. But, if you think about it, though, ultimately what we're doing is we're offering bounties on top of these referrals. And so Bountiful was a positive spin on the idea of a bounty. I joked early on in the company that, as did Scott, that sometimes bounty comes off almost like a Dog the Bounty Hunter kind of throwback to a really bad / awesome show. But so we use the term bounty frequently, but we like to keep it in the context of we're creating a bountiful experience or opportunity for folks that want to tap into their networks.
What decisions had you already made before you decided you needed to find a technology partner?
Admittedly, I came in a little biased, right? I with previous experience with Swan. So, but there's a couple of factors when you're working at a startup and you've got limited runway, right, and limited money to work with. The engineering is expensive, but it's necessary. Obviously, we wouldn't have a product without it. So, the decision needed to be: Are we going to build this product with an in-house team versus an external team or some kind of mix and match? Now, we did look at both, and I explored opportunities with both, and there were some fantastic companies that I looked at and spoke with, but cost is a huge factor. The challenge for I think any engineering leader when it comes to outsourcing their development is it's multifaceted. But if I was just to surface a couple of concerns, it's the cost is kind of a non-issue because it's obviously less expensive, right, to work with an outsourced organization. But you run the risk of having a lackluster team, lackluster skill set. You run the risk of losing control of the code base. If you're trying to integrate the two teams, there's potential challenges there, right? All of those things are things that tend to keep other leaders and other organizations from maybe going down the outsource path. In some cases, they've been bit by bad experiences, and that leaves kind of a bad, it just leaves a negative connotation for folks considering that. But in my mind, you have to consider it when you're in bootstrap mode, right? We weren't entirely bootstrapped, right? But that being said, we still had limited funds, and we needed to stretch our dollars as far as we could. Now, I had fortunately had prior experience with Swan, at least in 2 other iterations, and I have had nothing but positive experience with Swan and the Swan teams. Not only are Alex and Todd incredible folks to work with, both here locally, but the teams that they've built based in Ukraine are phenomenal, right? The engineers, the QE teams, the design teams. There's always a little bit of a gap when you have time zone gaps and maybe potential language barriers, but that's never really been an issue in working with Swan. So my presentation to Scott as my partner and to the board was ultimately that we can do twice as much for half as much with a team that I know and trust.
How many years have you worked on different projects with Swan?
That's tricky to say. I think in total, maybe just a few years. Now we've had let's say a working relationship or a relationship for at least, going back, probably going back 6, 7 years, something to that effect. Maybe that far. But yeah. So, I worked with Swan first when I was with 120 Water, and that was Indiana-based company that I worked for, and then again at Shift Lab, which I think Swan still works with, right? And in both cases have had nothing but positive experiences.
Okay, because yeah, you've worked with them across different companies. You seem to take them with you.
Yeah, and that's going to be really hard to give up, right? We always run it just like you would with an in-house engineering team. There's obstacles and there's hurdles and there's things that you have to solve for and mistakes that are made that you have to go back and clean up. But where the folks sit is irrelevant to me, right? If they're good engineers and they're product minded and customer minded, like the Swan team tends to be, that's a huge win.
Yeah, I think it's a great team.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm biased. Okay, so when and where did you first hear about Swan, if you remember?
Yeah, I have to think back, but I think it was just in searching, like what are our local, in fact, it was probably what are our local options for tacking on talent to our existing team for a lower cost, right? I was not keen on hiring an outsourced agency that was based overseas, meaning that there was no US based leadership, right? And it just so happened that Swan popped up and of course was right in my backyard in Carmel, where I was living at the time. So that made it very easy to meet Alex and Todd and some of the crew there, and then of course to be introduced to their teams overseas.
Okay. So focusing on the Bountiful application, what did you hire Swan to do?
Everything. So yeah, everything, top to bottom. So I knew, having had prior experience, I knew that Swan made it very easy to spin up what I would consider an end-to-end engineering squad. That's full stack with front end and back end specialists, some QE support, project management support, and product design support. Now we did hire our own in-house product designer, which I think was essential. Because ultimately that person and I worked together most closely on a day-to-day basis to define what it was we were building. As I was figuring out our roadmap, then that person could be building out the product designs, and then we could be handing those off to Swan, who would then kind of iterate over them and give their own feedback and perspective. So when I say everything, it really is kind of end to end. I was looking for, everything I would need to get out the door. Now we didn't do things like SREs or, a lot of the, maybe more scale up centric problems that we would have. We needed to get the MVP out the door. The question was whether we were going to continue in that path, past the MVP. Now I knew going into it that I likely would continue our relationship beyond the MVP to get into a V1, which is exactly what happened. There's always the opportunity though to say, okay, at what point do you bring in your own in-house engineers? And every leader is going to have a different definition of where that line in the sand is. We haven't crossed it, right? So a lot of it has to do with funding, but a lot of it has to do with I'm getting what I need right now and then some. So why wouldn't I just continue down this path?
Yeah, exactly. What technology stack did you use?
We went with what was fastest and least expensive to start with, and so knowing that we would also need to scale it and mature it relatively quickly. So we wanted to make sure that there was an element of maneuverability. So we started in Google Cloud. We are still in Google Cloud. We started as a Firebase project, largely driven by a React front end. And then kind of JavaScript on the back end, right? But the most of the early API, if you will, was serverless. It made it very easy to move things around because everything was broken out into functions. That's since matured, right? We've moved into Postgres as our primary data structures. We remain in Google Cloud. Many of those functions have now been moved into more of a pure API type scenario, at least with a facade. But yeah, that's where we started and where we'll probably continue for the time being.
So had you selected what technologies you wanted to use and everything
Oh,
before
yeah,
you talked to Swan?
that's a good question. I came in with some opinions, but I was looking for folks to push me on those opinions, right? So we worked closely with one of the lead engineers or architects on the Swan side to help make some of those early decisions. And we did go back and forth on a few different options, but ultimately came to the conclusion that we did based on a number of factors. How quickly can we get into this? What's the core strength of the development team now? How easy is it going to be to find engineers that have that core strength, right? Is it going to be easy to replace them if we needed to? All of those were factors in the decision-making process, but it also needed to be performant, and it needed to be something that was extendable and maintainable. And we didn't want to just hamstring something together that we were going to throw away. Going back to that, you asked earlier about parameters. I didn't want to throw away MVP. I knew that it needed to be something that we could evolve because we weren't going to have time or money to try to get the MVP out, find product market fit, and then go rebuild it. Does that make sense? We knew that we were going to have to pick it apart and mature it over time. So that was another consideration as we were picking the tech stack.
How big was your team at the beginning, and how big was Swan's team?
It's remained the same. So my team here is just myself and one other person, not including the other executives and folks from other organizations. But then the Swan team, we moved upwards of 6 engineers, not including the kind of additional support folks. So like QE, project manager, and design support.
Okay, so you went through a discovery process. About how long did that take?
It really wasn't that long. That's one of the things I've loved about working with Swan is that the onboarding process is so short. They grok, they understand the problem and the project relatively easy. Now, it's a relatively easy project. I'm not going to say that it's not, right? The early MVP was we need to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and that's it. So we specifically made it simple so we could get into that MVP and start experimenting with potential customers. The actual length of time, I can't say it was more than they were writing code within a couple of weeks. It was, we were up and running really fast.
Okay, did anything of note happen during the discovery process?
It's startup life. Things of note happen every day. We're, because you have an idea and you're trying to validate that idea in the market, which means you have to be able to respond and change things. So I wouldn't say there was any monumental shifts in what we were doing. It was really more around the product implication based, might have shifted based on validators we were getting from the market. Like what's going to be appealing to enterprise recruiters or agency recruiters or to, scouts, our external referrers, or to candidates, right? So those would be the things of note. I know that's not really a specific answer, but it was, let's summarize that as we had to be, and I think successfully were agile in the truest definition of the term, meaning that we were able to respond to shifts in our immediate roadmap to get the MVP up and out, and then and continue that as we were working on our V1 as well.
Okay. So why did you hire Swan above other developers? Did you ever consider working with somebody else, or was it pretty much Swan from the beginning?
It came down to 2 companies, one which was fully based in the United States, and then Swan. But it was really never a 50-50 decision. It was always Swan on top. And that largely comes with my own experience of having worked with them. I trusted them. I knew that they'd be able to maneuver the way I wanted them to. And then a part of it was cost and efficiency, right? So with the other company, one of the concerns I had was that they would effectively take the project, run with it, and deliver it back to you, right? And that's not entirely true. It's not entirely fair to say that way, but that's kind of what it summed up as. Whereas I knew that hiring Swan would feel very much like I just hired my engineering team, right? And I worked with them on a day-to-day basis, so we could work constructively together on a day-to-day basis. So that was, all of those things amounted to, hey, this is just a no-brainer for me.
Okay. So would you define Swan as like a one-stop shop for development?
That's a really good question. I think so. I'm going to say yes for anybody listening. I think that's a really good way to look at it. Now, there's considerations you have to make. Let's just take product design for as an example. The designer from the Swan team that we worked with was very good and very helpful and knocked out tasks, right? They were part-time, right? Because they weren't like a fully committed member of the team. They were working on other projects, but there's elements like that I think you have to keep closer, right? You have to have like, we had daily design sessions, right? That we just worked together. And we could have done that with Swan. I just don't know that it would have been as efficient. So that's not a knock on Swan's approach by any stretch. If somebody is looking to say, I need to get this idea to market quickly, and I don't have the funds to go hire a bunch of people, absolutely, Swan is a one-stop shop for that. But at some point, you're going to have to make the decision. Do you need an architect in-house? Do you need somebody to run infrastructure in-house, right? Do you need somebody to do product design in-house? Those are all things that you have to consider. But that's a scale problem, I think. And it's not necessarily something that, I can't speak to where Shift Lab is now, but at the time, Shift Lab and Swan were, Swan did everything, the product design, et cetera. So we leveraged the entirety of the team. So again, I have examples from my own experience with Swan that says, yes, it's a one-stop shop.
Okay. So what makes you keep coming back to Swan for development?
Quality of the work. Yeah, easy on that one. So I've worked with outsourced engineering firms that they don't have dedicated members of the team. People get swapped out all the time. They're not really a part of your team. They're more of just like this kind of black box, right? And then they produce things. There's not the quality of the code, the quality control in general is just not there. So I've been burned by that in the past. I know hundreds of other, engineers and engineering leaders that have had the same experience. It's very tricky to give up your idea or your code base to another organization that doesn't fit inside your operational parameter, right? Swan does, and so that's been, they've been the team, not just integral, but the team. And by producing quality code, by coming at it from a customer advocacy lens, our project manager is fantastic at coming back with ideas based on designs we send to say, hey, what if, or what about, or, how does this impact this particular part of the business or customer? That's been paramount. I have yet to come across another outsourced engineering firm that does the same or brings that same kind of mindset.
So how has Swan's team helped guide your decision-making in architecting the project, would you say?
I would say that they are instrumental. And I say that because I am happy to make the decisions on my own, but it's not my choice. I would rather have inputs from other folks, right? I've got my head in tactical pieces, strategic pieces. I'm in products, ideation. I'm working on this, sales and go-to-market and trying to support marketing. So as a technologist, I maybe 80% of my time or maybe even a little bit less is spent on actual technology at this point. So it's paramount to have a team that can come and say, we don't think we should do it this way, and here's why. It's another thing to say, I need this project built, and have a team pick it up and just build it and not ask, right, how it should be built.
Yeah.
So now that might be valuable to some folks because they, maybe you have a non-technical founder who doesn't know, right?
Yeah.
That could be really problematic. It could be great for them, but it could be really problematic to have an outsourced team that doesn't really give them feedback or explain why they're making the decisions they're making. That's why I think it's important to have a technical leader within a startup to help guide that. But Swan very much feels like a partnership in that decision-making process. Now, at the end of the day, if I disagree and I want to go the whatever's in my head, that's what they'll do. And they've always been, very calm about saying, okay, cool, yeah, we'll just go do that. It's a disagree and commit kind of mentality, which is something I look for in even my internal teams. But the proof's in the pudding. Swan builds good software. They know the tech that they're talking about. They have justifiable inputs, right? Meaning like, hey, we don't think this or we think that based on these factors. And then we can kind of hash it out and go back and forth. So what I find is I'm not spending the majority of my time like, you're wringing my hands like, what should I do? It's like, I've got data points here. I have my own, Swan brings theirs, and then we can go make a decision and we're off and running. So we don't have to sit and dilly-dally all day long.
So do the engineers help you as a CTO to conceptualize components of the project in a better way?
Yeah, I think so. They might be better suited to answer that, to be honest. They might, because I think I'll probably have my own perspective on that. But yeah, there's a certain extent with regards to componentry. If we're thinking about actual, code componentry, that I say, hey, this is what it needs to do, and here's the acceptance criteria. I don't really care how it's done. There are certain things that I absolutely care how it's done because they influence other areas, right? So, as long as there was an evident reason behind a decision, I didn't really have to spend a whole lot of time worrying about, the componentry necessarily, because again, we were looking for speed and performance, right? We wanted to get it done fast and needed to make sure it worked, out of the box. Now, what I will say, and maybe you've got another question related to this, but Swan was very good at coming back and saying, hey, if you do this, this is what's going to happen to these other users, or there's no input over here for XYZ. So there was a lot of really good if-then kind of analysis, right, that the Swan team provided, that because I was moving so fast, sometimes I missed, and they'd be able to come back and say, if we do this, this is going to break, rather than then just looking at the list of requirements that I sent them, building it and giving it back, and me finding an issue later on saying, well, why didn't we cover this? And somebody just saying, well, it wasn't in your list of requirements, right? That's not the way to build software. You have to have an engineering team that's willing to say, that's cool, but if we do it that way, or what about this? Or, again, it's that customer mindedness, that product mindedness that's really important. And I found that that's true of every person that's been on the team. They, at least once I've had every person that's been on the squad come to me and say, hey, I think this is an issue, and or how do you want to resolve this, or asking questions on the designs because they don't quite make sense. And in particular, our project manager is fantastic at surfacing a lot of those questions. So we have a lot of really, sometimes colorful conversations around like, hey, how is this supposed to go? And what's the best choice? And at the end of the day, I think what we've built is a fantastic piece of software because of that type of interaction.
So did you need to pivot at all on the project?
Pivot's a strong word. We've made minor strategic shifts in terms of, what customer we're going after, what user type we're going after. Are we going to focus on a specific industry segment, things like that. And those all come with little implications for the product. But at the end of the day, the four kind of core value propositions for what the problem we're trying to solve, it never changed, right? It was just really a matter of like, okay, if we focus on enterprise recruiting, they're really interested in their employee referral program and then extending. If we're talking about agency recruiters, they don't really have employees to worry about. They just want to go extend this out into these external networks, right? So there's product implication that comes as a result of that. And so some of those could potentially be called pivots. They're probably more just additive value streams that, and what it came down to is prioritizing which one's more important now versus a month from now or 3 months from now.
So was the project you received the one you envisioned?
Oh yeah. Yeah. But we were also in it day to day, right? We managed the product design so that, it was going to look like that no matter what. The question of whether or not it worked was, kind of TBD until we got code in hand and we could see it in production. So the product that we built together was the product we built together, and it was the one that we set out to build.
So did you do the 2-week sprint meetings, or
We did a
how
little
often
bit.
did you meet?
Yeah, well, we met several times a week, at least with the project manager and sometimes with others, the lead QE, lead engineer, that kind of thing. So I'm not one for just meetings for the sake of meetings, and I don't think anybody appreciates that anymore. So really it was, where are we today? Where are we going next? Right. And then what are the blockers? Those are the things that I was pretty much always focused on. And I think the team was always focused on. Now, we experimented and with the idea of a smaller cycle rather than a 2-week sprint cycle necessarily, something a little bit more, I don't know what you want to call it. It's not really pure Kanban, but it kind of evolved into that. So we really kind of looked at it as like week-long cycles of, can we break these tickets down into, 4-hour chunks or no more than 8-hour chunks, giving us basically a really kind of stringent way to measure capacity, and then of course velocity off of that. So whether that worked or not, I'm still considering, right? It didn't do us any disservice, but there was definitely the period of time where we built something. Let's say it takes a few days to build, but then it's dependent on 2 or 3 other parts that take more time to build, and then you have to test it all cohesively. That's really hard to do in a week. You're generally not going to do it in a week. So what ended up happening was, somewhat organically, we have these overlapping 2-week cycles, if you will, where week 1 is develop, week 2 is test. And because they overlap, you've always got things that are being developed every week, and then you've got things that are kind of being tested in arrears almost, right? So now, of course, then when you're building a project from scratch, a lot of the testing doesn't happen until, the functional testing at least, and acceptance testing doesn't happen until you're kind of getting closer to go time, right? Because there's so much back end work that's being done. There's nothing there to look at until it's up and running. Yeah. Now that we're into a V1 and we're seeing incremental enhancements and features, it's a lot easier to kind of stick to that cycle.
So what was your favorite part about working with Swan?
From the business perspective, the quality of the output, quality of the interactions, the availability of the team being my team and not being farmed out to multiple projects at a time, lack of distractions for the squad, that was easily my favorite. From the personal perspective, I don't know what it's like to live in Ukraine right now, right? And there's an element there that I have to admit is, maybe it's selfishly motivated, I'm not sure, but there's an element there where I don't know how to help, right, in the environment that they're living in, outside of, can I send them work, right? What can I do, right? And, so one of the things that I love about Swan in general is at least seemingly the care that Alex has for his teams, right? And everything he's done to kind of help do what he can for what is really a pretty crappy situation. And our project manager has always been forthcoming when I've asked, how is everybody, right? Is everybody safe, healthy, right? And generally speaking, that's been met with, yes, thank you for asking, kind of thing. So favorite part, that's kind of hard to call that a favorite part, but at the same time, like, there's a little bit of a humanistic element there that I have to say, sending it somewhere else to people that I don't really know would have been a lot harder.
Yeah. So is there any part of working with Swan you didn't enjoy?
No, time zone gaps and language barriers are a challenge everywhere, but they're a challenge for distributed teams, no matter whether they're in-house FTEs or if they are contracted employees. That's still an issue. So now I happen to be on the East Coast, so the time zone difference wasn't that big, and then the team also kind of adjusted their working hours. Like I hate to say it because I don't like people working, past, what I would consider a healthy life balance, but the team always seemed available, I hope I told them at one point, don't answer me if I'm getting you in the middle of the night, right? Like that's not my intent. But generally speaking, the folks that I needed to hear from, I heard from, relatively quickly. And so I was very appreciative of that.
Still, have you released your MVP to market or your first version?
Yeah. So actually we got MVP from zero to market in about 3 months, really fast. Now we scoped it right. That was a factor in that speed, but and then we released what we would call our V1 in September, October timeframe, and have been evolving it since then. So we've been in the market and continuing to build some momentum and visibility around it.
Still, is Swan a professional company to work with?
Yeah, I think that's a given. Yeah.
Okay. Would you work with Swan again?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope to, in fact, we're still working with them, right? So that's not going away, so, but if I found myself in another position elsewhere and there was an opportunity to bring in an outside team, I would certainly be bringing Swan to the top of the list.
What would you say to a company that was considering working with Swan on a project?
It's like referring anybody else. It's a lot easier for me to refer engineers that I know and trust. Now, with Swan or any other outsourced team that you might get to know very well, I may not know the engineers that Swan has at hand that are available for that given project, but I can say that at least on the leadership side of things, they're going to do everything they can to make sure that you have everything you need, right? So, I would highly recommend them as a solution, particularly around, getting things to market. But even for a company that was established, that was looking to incrementally grow or expand their capacity, with outside support, to look at Swan, because it really is a true, plug and play kind of scenario for pretty much any company that could need that kind of support.